Now, third objective is to separate mixed costs into fixed and variable components using high-low, scatterplot, and least squares. Now, as I mentioned, diba, if given na ang imuhang fixed o variable cost is dali ra siya. However, in reality, is kasagaran is mag-involve man gyud siya og mixed cost, no? Di man jud like strictly variable ra, strictly fixed. Ana naman jud kasagaran is ang gamit gyud is ang mixed cost. So, it is then necessary to identify nimo ang kato imong fixed ug variable. Again, nganong kailangan ma-identify na tong fixed ug variable? Balik ta atong implications, di ba? With getting it, bakabaw ka sa imong excess capacity at katong mga na-mention na prior. Now, we have kato siya, kana siya nga mga methods. But before that is, kanisa, mag-consider sa ato ang linearity assumption. So, man niya akong mention atong sa variable cost na part, na your variable cost has a direct relationship, or ang variable cost nimo is na direct relationship between your cost and your activity drivers. So, meaning as your units of units produced increases, your cost also increases. So, kani siyang assumption ang ato ang i-consider, no, when we are analyzing or we're trying to understand the cost behavior. Now, how reasonable is this assumption that costs are linear? Do variable costs really increase in direct proportion to increases in the level of activity driver? If not, then how closely does this assumed linear cost function approximate the underlying cost function? Now, some economists usually argue that variable costs increase at a decreasing rate up to a certain volume, at which point they increase at an increasing rate. So, meaning na siya may pagka non-linear gamay, no? Now, what if the non-linear view more accurately portrays reality, which is what usually happens? So, what do we do then? So, one possibility is to determine the actual cost function. But then, every activity could have different cost function, and this approach could be very time-consuming and expensive. Thus, it is much simpler to assume a linear relationship. So, if the linear relationship is assumed, then the main concern is how well this assumption approximates the underlying cost function. So, moto mas gina-prefer gihapon to make use of the linear is because it is much easier. Now, how well does the linear assumption again approximate the underlying cost function? So, diba, as what was mentioned prior, diba, your total cost is your fixed cost plus your variable cost, wherein your variable cost is your variable cost rate or variable per unit times your number of outputs produced. So, again, muna siya, katakong gimension. So, this equation is your cost formula. So, ato ning i-breakdown. Ato ning siyang i-breakdown na itong cost formula, no? So, as you can see in the formula, your total cost is what you can consider as your dependent variable. Again, your total cost is your dependent variable. When we say dependent, meaning mag-agad siya or its value depends on the value of iyahang mga independent, or its value depends on the value of the other factors. So in this case, ay imong total cost is it would depend on your fixed cost and your variable cost. So that is why your total cost is considered as a dependent variable. Now, your independent variable, diba? Your independent variable therein is considered as your, katong pwede ra siya mo stand alone, isang imuha na siyang output. Diba? Your output output, or when you say independent variable, it is a variable that measures output and explains changes in the cost. So meaning it is an activity driver. So in this case, ato ang activity driver is ato ang output. So meaning when we say independent variable, ang ato na siyang activity driver. So the choice of an independent variable is related to its economic plausibility. So that is, the manager will attempt to find an independent variable that causes or is closely associated with the dependent variable. Now, we have what we call the intercept parameter. So your intercept parameter is your fixed cost. So as you can see here, the intercept parameter is the point at which your mixed cost line intercepts the cost. So ari, mo ni siya atong intercept. Mo nang gitawag nga intercept parameter nga to ang fixed cost. And then our variable rate is our slope parameter. So it corresponds to the variable cost per unit of activity. So mo akong gi-mention there ganiha nga katong ang ato ang variable is ingon siya sa ato ang slope, no? Okay, since mo siya man ang naay murag movement. So mo na siya ang mag-determine. So since accounting records reveal only the amount of activity output and the total cost, those values must be used to estimate the intercept and the slope parameters. So with estimates of fixed costs and variable costs, the fixed and variable components can be estimated and the behavior of the mixed costs can be predicted as activity usage changes. So there are three methods that can be used to describe for estimating the fixed cost and variable cost. So, muna siyang i-mention kaniha, the high-low, the scatter plot, and the methods of least squares. So, mag-start ta sa high-low. I believe these three methods is familiar na gid mo ani na three methods, no? Kaya nanay siya sa inyong cost. So, kana ato alam diri is dila kay ta mo dig deeper. Kabaw naman mo sa equations. So, kana na lang siya. The high-low method is a method of determining the equation of a straight line by pre-selecting 2 points, which is the high point and the low point. That will then be used to compute the intercept and the slope parameters. So the high point is defined as a point with the highest output or activity level, while the low point is of course with the lowest output and activity level. So the formula sa ato ang high-low method, para makuha na to nga ang variable katong, di ba, variable rate is our slope parameter, and then our fixed cost is our intercept parameter. So para makuha na to tong variable rate, we have the change in cost divided by the change in output, or diba, atong change in cost can be also shown as your high cost minus your low cost divided by your high output minus your low output. So, it doesn't necessarily mean nga, diba, kung na kay set of information, it doesn't necessarily mean nga ang imuhang high cost kay maupod na automatically, or katong line item na nakay high cost is maupo na siya automatically ang item na nakakay high output, diba? It is usually the case, pero di tanan is ana. So, ana lang siya. Mula na inyong i-remember. Now, for the fixed cost, it is your total cost for high point, diba, minus your variable rate times your high output. High point na output. Then, kung aripod ka sa low, is ang imuha na siyang cost for low point minus your variable rate times low na output. So, kana siya. Next is our scatterplot method. So, scatterplot method is a method of determining the equation of a line by plotting the data on a graph. So the first step in applying the scatterplot method is to plot the data points so that the relationship between setup cost and activity level can be seen. So kaning scatterplot kay naka-try naman siguro mo ani sa katong scatter diagram sa BA319. Diba? So, muna na siya. Inana ka easy ang pagbuhat sa imuhang scatter plot. So, ang imuha lang is makita nimo ang relationship between the points. So, diba? In this example, atong point 1 is 1,000. 1,000 ang ihang cost and 100 ihang quantity. Then, our point 2 is 1 to 50 and then 200 and so on and so forth. So, as you can see sa iyaha is, again, dili gyud siya exactly nga super straight line. However, you can see na katong the relationship between your cost and your setup hours, in this case, diba, ang setup hours is our activity driver, diba? You can see na naadjud siya direct relationship or diba kani siya nga movement is ang trend line is katog yung pareha sa atoang variable katong sa linear assumption na to ba, diba? So mo na siya. So a scatter diagram or scatter graph can help provide insight concerning the relationship between your cost and activity usage. So in fact, a scatter graph allows one to visually fit a line to the points on the scatter graph. In doing so, the line chosen should be the one that appears to best fit the points. So in making that choice, a manager or cost analyst is free to use past experience with the behavior of the cost item. Then experience may provide a good intuitive sense of how setup costs behave. The scatter graph then becomes a useful tool to quantify this intuition. So, fitting a line to the points in this way is how the scatter plot method works. Now, keep in mind that the scatter graph and other statistical aids are tools that can help managers improve their judgment. Using the tools does not restrict the manager from using judgment to alter any of the estimates produced by formal methods. So, diba, kung ikaw manage, you as a part of the management, there are times where in your experience may tell you that mo ni siya ang usual na cost behavior. Now, these methods are just supplementals in order for you to, or these are just supplementals as basis to your decisions. Yan na siya. So, even though you have those intuitions based on your experiences, it is still good to have these methods in order for others, but not all your colleagues can sometimes understand your decision. So in order to justify or give more credit to your decisions based on your experiences or your intuition, it is good na they can really see something or they can really see the movement through the use of these methods. So, for instance, dili ra kam kayo nga, oh sure, jud lagi ko nga basta mudako atong setup cost kay basta mudako atong setup hours kay mudako jud ato ang setup cost, di ba? If moingon lang ka ana without showing any proof or any basis of that is kasagaran is dili gyud tayon diha na mutuo, di ba, ang imong mga ingnan na nga person. But if, for instance, you show them a scatterplot method and then they can really see nga, okay, sakto gid ito imong giingon kay based sa data is tanawa ni naadjay more naadjay direct relationship between our costs and your setup hours and so on and so forth. So it is a good supplemental information, a good way of giving or providing supplemental information to your decisions made. So mo na siya ang gamit ani nga mga methods, no? So what are the advantages and the disadvantages of our scatter plot? So as you can see, scatter plot allows you to see the data. Okay, of course, makitaan man nimo siya sa katong graph, but it lacks any objective criterion for choosing the best fit line. So when you say best fit line, katong line nga Kani siya. Diba? Sa amin pagkuan nga mo na siya ang best fit na line. Ganun di man nga ari dapat maigo siya sa wa niya. Diha na siya mosunod. Ganun dili man paingon ani or ganun nimak siya. Diba? Ganung inani yung gid imong line. Diba? Kana siya ba? Mo na siya ang gipasabot nga best fit. Ganun dili man nga ani diri niya paana. Diba? Ganung inan amang gid ganung kaniman imong best fit. So, wala na siya morg naka-disadvantage sa imong scatter plot. Now, next we have the methods of least squares. So, methods of least squares, these are when the squares or first squares of each single deviation and then sums these square deviations as the overall measure of closeness. So, squaring the deviations, avoid the cancellation problem caused by a mix of positive and negative numbers. So, as mentioned, diba, iyang i-cancel out or katong iyang i-counter ang imuhang disadvantage of using square method, using scatter plot, especially when there are the existence of negative values. So, meaning murag mas credible siya. Then, it adds them to give an overall measure of closeness of fit of line to data. So, the line that fits the points better than any other line is called the best fitting line. So, it is the line with the smallest least sum of square deviations, and then the method of least squares identifies the best fitting line. Now, kani siya is mas dali siya gamiton if magamit natag Excel or kana mga regression programs, kana di ta maglisod-lisod sa tong kinabuhi, no? Kaya trabaho na to, dibita na nato i-manually o compute. Dali ra kay pag-type og functions Excel niya, makuha na din yung mga regression. So, kana siya. So, di kita mo dwell sa mga equations especially. Siguro, adto lang sa high-low is moment to ang dali ra i-compute manually. Pero, as for the scatter plot and the least squares is, hiro kay mukha problema, di ito mag-compute, ana. Because in reality, dali ra kay manara kay mag-provide ra kag data sa Excel, mag-input ra kag data sa imong Excel, generate ra kag scatter plot or mag-compute ra kag dito sa imong regression, diba? Ana siya ka easy. As to the high low is kato siya mo to siya dali ra kayo i-manual. So at least mo to siya i-expect ninyo if ever na amang gani sa mga quizzes. Pero as to real life situations, again, ang most preferable is mo gamit na ta sa technology available. Di ta maglisod-lisod sa tong kinabuhi. So, kana siya. Now, fourth objective is evaluate the reliability of a cost equation. So, how reliable is the cost equation developed by the least squares method. Diba? Again, sa ato ang problema ato sa atong scatter plot is dili kay siya moingon sa ato ang best fit. And then, ang disadvantage sa ato ang scatter plot is gi-answer na siya sa ato ang least squares. Kaya diba siya man ang mo best identify sa ato ang best fitting line. Now, how reliable is this? So, para makuha na to ang reliability, ani na ta sa ato ang mga goodness of fit na measurements. So, we have the coefficient of determination and the coefficient of correlation. So, mo niya to mga goodness of fit or mo niya mga methods para ma-determine na to ang goodness of fit of our cost equation. So, kani siya is mga statistic topics kaya po ni siya, no? Ang computation ani is more na fall under siya sa tuwang statistics. Ang pagkuha ni sa Excel is magamit ka sa Pearson or sa katong correlation nga function. Now, for kita una sa atong R2, so our coefficient of determination is the percentage of variability in the dependent variable that is explained by the independent variable. So, this percentage is a good fitness of fit measure. And the higher the percentage of cost variability explained, the better the fit, since the coefficient of determination is the proportion of variability explained. So, it is always between 0 and 1. So, meaning the higher the better. So magkaduol siya sa 1, mas makaingon ka na mas good ang iyahang fit or mas positive ang iyahang relationship. Now, arita sa correlation, so it is simply the square root of your coefficient determination, no? So, since it is square root ra, and then square roots can be negative, so that is why iyahang range is not any fall between -1 and the +1. So, if the coefficient correlation is positive, again, if the coefficient of correlation is positive, then the two variables, kato imuhang cause o imuhang activity driver, move together in the same direction, and the positive correlation exists. So, meaning, the higher your positive correlation is, meaning the stronger ang relationship between your two variables. So, meaning the more positive the relationship is between your two variables. So, a perfect positive correlation would yield a value of exactly 1. And if balipod siya, diba? A perfect negative correlation would yield a coefficient correlation of exactly -1. Now, if the coefficient correlation, diba, is na-adjud siya padung siya doon sa 0. So, it indicates that there is no correlation. So, ana lang siya. Again, positive gani or +1, magkado sa +1 is magka-positive ang imuhang correlation. So meaning, kung saka, for example, ito sa itong mga cause ug activity driver, kung tag na positive correlation, kung musaka ang imuhang cause, musaka po ang imuhang activity driver. So, that is a positive nga correlation. If negative nga correlation is musaka ang imuhang cause, mo decrease ang imuhang activity driver. So, ana siya. Mana siya ang negative. So, anaon pag-analyze sa imuhang coefficient correlation. So, meaning, nag-show siya on how it shows the relationship between two variables. So, again, magkaduol siya sa 0, meaning, wala siya correlation. So, for example, ang imuhang cause is whatever your activity driver is, mo na imuhang independent variable, is wala ra siya relation sa imuhang cause. So, kana, whether musaka or muubos ang imuhang activity driver is dili siya maka-affect sa pagsaka og ubos sa imuhang cause. Ina na siya mo nang no correlation. Mo na pasabot. So, dili pasabot nga negative ang imuhang correlation is no correlation siya. Lahi na ang no correlation o imong negative correlation. Now, we have here multiple regression. Ang imong multiple regression na lang is nag-involve ra siya og more than 2 variables. Ang ganiha is simple regression lang to siya. Exactly 2 variables raman. 1 dependent and 1 independent. However, in multiple regression is 2 or more independent variables na. So, meaning, di ba, kato ang ganiha sa ato ang example or katong sa graph is dili ra siya simply dili ra siya 2D nga x and y ra. So, kana siya. In multiple regression, a single independent variable may explain much less of the variability in the dependent variable. So, it's not always na isa ra ka independent variable ang maka-affect sa imuhang dependent variable. So, that is when the usage of multiple regression comes in. So, again, as I mentioned, when there are 2 or more independent variables, the high-low method and the scatterplot method cannot be used. So, if your scatterplot method cannot be used, of course, your least squares can also be used, no? So, with that, we make use of multiple regressions. Now, again, dito maglisod-lisod kaya ang multiple regression, nara paghihapon na siya sa imuhang Excel. So, Kana lang na siya. Just know that you make use of multiple regressions when you are already dealing with 2 or more independent variables that affect your dependent variable. Now, the last method of determining cost behavior is your managerial judgment. So, when you say managerial judgment, it is, which is widely used in the industry, it is when managers simply use their experience and past observations of cost relationship to determine the variable and fixed cost. This method, however, may take a number of forms. So some managers simply assign particular activity costs to fixed category and others to variable category, ignoring the possibility of mixed costs. So again, it would differ on the person who makes the judgment. So, in managerial judgment, diba, as mentioned, managers use experience and judgment. However, they can use this to refine statistical estimation results. So, as I mentioned before, there can be instances wherein a manager will see beforehand or explain beforehand that this can be a possible outcome of the data that they have, and then the statistical computations would just serve as a backup or supplemental, diba, on the decision made or the points made out by the manager. So, statistical techniques, as mentioned, least squares, regression analysis, high-low method, those techniques, they are accurate in determining the past because they deal with historical data. So, however, these statistical techniques cannot foresee the future, which is what is the objective or what the management really wants. So that is why your statistical methods or techniques are just supplemental. They will just serve as a basis, for example, for you to analyze the trends and see na based on the past, this is what happens. So this may be what we will expect to happen in the future given the data we've had in the past. So that is how managerial judgment is used. So its advantage is, again, it is simple. So it depends on the management if they just want, okay, this is fixed cost, okay, this is variable cost, diba? Wala na competition na mahitabo. Diba sila na yun nga, okay, this will be our activity cost drivers for this, we will use this to compete for the fixed cost, we will use this for the, to compete for the variable cost and so on and so forth. So si management na tanan ang mag-determine, no, so mas efficient siya or mas dali mabuhat ang trabaho given that you're just relying on the professional judgment of the management, because usually especially if you are dealing with experienced managers, they already have a vision, or they already understand the behavior of the cost since they have been doing it through experience. So makaingon sila nga, this happened in the past, so this can happen again. So murag na sila basis ba na based on judgment. However, one disadvantage is because humans ra pud ta, diba? Or people in the management are also humans, so there are instances wherein they will not practice good judgment. Therefore, errors may occur. So, with that, diba, it is important to consider still managerial judgment. However, you should also still consider that those judgments given or the points given are still susceptible to errors. Meaning, you need to take into account that if you are doing this, you should also consider the consequences, because that point or that information given by the management can also be mistaken or erroneous. So still you need to take into consideration that errors can occur given your specific judgment. So dili kay kung moingon si manager na okay mao na gid ni ang mahitabo, sure gid ko ana na wala ra inyo ra sang dawaton, igo ra mo dawat without thinking of a mga backup plan, 'di ba? If ever nga, okay, if ever sayop din ni ang ingon sa management, what can we do as a backup plan? Diba? So you need to take into consideration na masayop ang imuhang management or the people who are making decisions. So that's still part of your factors to consider. So again, what is best good if you are analyzing cost behaviors if you are determining cost behaviors is a combination of all those processes. So again, it is best if it is a combination of both the statistical and the managerial judgment, so that you can really see that both subjective and objectively your decisions will be made on a more accurate and creditable na basis. So kana siya. That is the end of chapter 3 or the activity cost behavior.